She traveled 2,000 miles to start a new life, only to be rejected the moment she stepped off the train. What happened next would change not just her fate, but an entire frontier town. This is the remarkable true story of a woman who discovered that sometimes the greatest beauty lies in the courage to begin again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Morgan had spent her 26 years watching life happen to other people. In Philadelphia, she'd grown accustomed to the pitying glances, the whispered comments that followed her down cobblestone streets. The polio that struck her at age 8 had left her with more than just a pronounced limp. It had marked her as different in a society that prized perfection, particularly in its women. Her mirror reflected the truth she'd long accepted: unremarkable brown eyes, magnified by spectacles that few women wore in public, hair that had begun graying when she was barely 20, and plain features that no amount of careful grooming could transform into the fashionable beauty her contemporaries possessed. As a schoolteacher, she'd found purpose in educating young minds, but the school board had made it clear: unmarried female teachers were to be young, attractive paragons of virtue. At 26, with her physical limitations, Eleanor was already being gently pushed toward retirement. The letter that changed everything arrived on a rain-soaked Tuesday. Her cousin Martha had sent a newspaper clipping from Montana Territory. Established gentleman of means seeks educated bride for companionship and assistance with correspondence. Age and appearance secondary to character and intellect. Eleanor had stared at those words until they blurred, her heart quickening with something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Within those carefully chosen words, she sensed possibility, a life where her mind might matter more than her limp. After 3 exchanged letters with William Parker, each more promising than the last, she'd made her decision. The Montana Territory called to her with the promise of purpose, respect, and perhaps even companionship. Now, as the train's wheels screeched against iron rails, Eleanor gripped the worn leather handle of her suitcase, stomach fluttering with nervous anticipation. Through soot-streaked windows, she caught her first glimpse of Pine Ridge, a collection of wooden buildings stretched along a single dusty street, the snow-capped mountains rising majestically behind them. So different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and brick edifices. Eleanor smoothed her simple grey traveling dress, adjusting her spectacles with trembling fingers. Her practical boots felt suddenly inadequate as she rose, gathering her courage. Along with her modest belongings, the conductor called out, "Pine Ridge Station," as the train shuddered to a final stop, steam billowing past the windows. "You'll be fine," she whispered to herself, a habit formed during years of facing classrooms full of scrutinizing children. "Remember your worth." The platform was sparse, just a few travelers disembarking alongside her. Eleanor scanned the small crowd, searching for the face that matched the description in William Parker's letters: tall, broad-shouldered, with a distinguished mustache. When she spotted him standing apart from the others, hat in hand, she felt a momentary flutter of relief. He was as handsome as his letters had implied, well-dressed in a manner that suggested prosperity. Eleanor raised her hand in a tentative greeting, taking a step forward. Her boot caught on an uneven plank, causing her to stumble slightly, her characteristic limp more pronounced after the long journey. She recovered quickly, a lifetime of such moments having taught her dignity in the face of physical awkwardness. William Parker's expression shifted as she approached, his welcoming smile faltering, eyes narrowing slightly as they moved from her face to her spectacles, then to her uneven gait. Eleanor had seen that look countless times before. The moment when anticipation transformed into disappointment. "Mr. Parker," she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Eleanor Morgan. William cleared his throat, his gaze now deliberately fixed somewhere above her head. "Miss Morgan, I wasn't expecting—" His voice trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward her. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Your letters mentioned character and intellect being of primary importance," she said quietly. "Yes, well," he cleared his throat again, discomfort evident in every line of his body. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." The small crowd on the platform had grown silent, attention drawn to their uncomfortable exchange. Eleanor became acutely aware of curious glances, of whispers behind raised hands. In that moment, Philadelphia's familiar humiliation seemed preferable to this public rejection among strangers. William Parker took a step backward, creating physical distance to match the emotional chasm already opening between them. "I'm afraid this won't work, Miss Morgan. Pine Ridge has certain standards. As the town's banker, I have a position to maintain." The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. Standards, position, the familiar vocabulary of rejection dressed in frontier clothing. "I see," she managed, dignity her only remaining shield. "And my qualifications as a teacher, my experience with bookkeeping, these were of interest in your letters." "Frankly, Miss Morgan, I was expecting someone more." He gestured vaguely. "Again, presentable. Someone who could enhance my standing in the community, not someone who would raise questions." From the gathering crowd, a woman's voice carried clearly, "She's crippled, William, and those glasses, how old is she anyway?" Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her grip on her suitcase so tight her knuckles whitened. 6 days of travel, her life savings invested in this journey, and nowhere to return to. She'd given up her boarding house room, sold most of her possessions. "I wish you a safe journey back east, Miss Morgan," William said, already turning away, eager to distance himself from his mistake. "The eastbound train returns tomorrow morning." "And where am I to stay tonight?" Eleanor asked, hating the tremor that had crept into her voice. William Parker was already walking away, shoulders stiff with embarrassment. "The station has benches," he called over his shoulder. "Or perhaps the saloon might have a room." More laughter followed, crueler now. Eleanor blinked rapidly behind her spectacles, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her tears. She had faced worse, she reminded herself. She would survive. This too. "That's enough!" The sharp command cut through the murmurs and laughter. The crowd parted as a tall man strode forward. Unlike William Parker's tailored suit, this man wore practical clothing, a worn leather vest over a simple shirt, denim pants tucked into scuffed boots. His face was weathered by sun and wind, dark hair, longer than was fashionable, tied back, with a leather cord. "You ought to be ashamed," he continued, addressing the crowd rather than William Parker's retreating back. "Is this how Pine Ridge welcomes visitors?" His gaze swept over the onlookers, and Eleanor noticed something unusual in his features, high cheekbones and copper undertones to his skin that spoke of mixed heritage. Native American, she guessed, combined with European ancestry. The crowd dispersed gradually, discomfort replacing mockery as they shuffled away. Only the stranger remained, turning to Eleanor with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Not a pity which she was accustomed to, but something more complex. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Samuel Thornton," he said simply, offering a calloused hand. "I run Evergreen Ranch outside town." Eleanor hesitated, then accepted the handshake. His grip was firm but careful, treating her as neither fragile nor incapable. "Eleanor Morgan," she replied, though I suppose everyone heard that exchange. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Pine Ridge has little entertainment beyond other people's business. His eyes, a striking shade that reminded her of amber held to sunlight, assessed her thoughtfully. "You need lodging, Miss Morgan." Wariness flickered through her. Experience had taught her to be suspicious of unexpected kindness, particularly from men. "I couldn't impose," she began cautiously. "No imposition," he interrupted. "My ranch has a small cabin for guests. It's private, clean, and you can stay until you decide your next steps." Seeing her hesitation, he added, "My housekeeper, Mrs. Whitaker, lives on the property. You'll have proper chaperoning if that's your concern." Eleanor weighed her options, which were admittedly few. A night on the station bench would be both uncomfortable and potentially dangerous. The saloon was unthinkable for a woman alone. "Why would you help me?" she asked directly, teacher's practicality overriding social niceties. Samuel Thornton's expression softened slightly. "Because 15 years ago, I watched this town reject my mother for being half Blackfoot. Some things should change." He gestured to her suitcase. "May I?" Eleanor surrendered her luggage, noticing how he didn't rush ahead, but instead matched his pace to hers, making no comment about her uneven gait. They walked toward a wagon at the far end of the platform, drawing stares that Samuel seemed entirely unconcerned by. "I should warn you, Miss Morgan," he said as he helped her onto the wagon bench. "Pine Ridge has a long memory for grudges and a short one for kindness. Accepting my help might not improve your standing here." Eleanor settled her skirts, an unexpected laugh escaping her. "Mr. Thornton, I believe my standing in Pine Ridge was determined the moment I limped off that train. I have little left to lose." For the first time, Samuel Thornton smiled fully, transforming his stern features. "Then we understand each other." As the wagon pulled away from the station, Eleanor felt the weight of judgment fade slightly. Ahead, the road curved toward distant mountains, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Behind, the whistle of the train that had brought her to this unexpected juncture faded into silence. She had come west, seeking acceptance and a new beginning. Neither had materialized as expected. Yet as the wagon bounced along the rutted road, Eleanor felt something stir within her, not quite hope, but perhaps its more cautious cousin, possibility. Samuel Thornton drove in comfortable silence, offering her the space to absorb her surroundings without forced conversation. The landscape opened before them, vast meadows dotted with wildflowers, pine forests climbing the mountain slopes, the sky an impossible blue that Philadelphia's industrial haze had never permitted. "It's beautiful," Eleanor murmured, almost to herself. "It can be harsh too," Samuel replied, eyes on the road. "Winters that freeze your breath, summers that parch the land. But yes, beautiful in its honesty." They crested a small rise, and Evergreen Ranch came into view below. A sturdy two-story farmhouse built of dark timber, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings nestled in a valley alongside a creek lined with cottonwoods. An apple orchard spread behind the house, trees just beginning to blossom with pale pink flowers. "You've built quite a home," Eleanor observed. "My father started it. I've just been trying not to ruin his work." There was something in his tone, not bitterness exactly, but a complexity that suggested the legacy was complicated. As they approached, Eleanor noticed a small figure dash from the barn toward the house. A child, she realized. A girl of perhaps 7 or 8, with dark braids flying behind her. "My daughter, Hannah," Samuel explained, catching her questioning glance. "Her mother died of fever 3 winters ago." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said simply. Samuel nodded acknowledgement, pulling the wagon to a stop before the house. "Hannah," he called, "come meet our guest." The girl approached shyly, curiosity warring with politeness in her expressive face. Eleanor recognized immediately that Hannah had inherited her father's eyes, though her features suggested a blending of his heritage with what Eleanor guessed had been a fair-haired mother. "Hannah, this is Miss Morgan. She'll be staying in the guest cabin for a while." Eleanor smiled warmly, extending her hand as she would to one of her students. "It's lovely to meet you, Hannah. You can call me Miss Ellie if you'd like." Hannah studied her openly with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "You walk funny," she observed. "Hannah," Samuel said sharply, but Eleanor waved away his concern. "It's all right," she assured him before addressing Hannah directly. "I had an illness when I was about your age that affected my leg. It doesn't hurt anymore, but it left me with a limp." Hannah considered this. "Does it make you sad?" The directness of the question caught Eleanor off guard, but she answered honestly. "Sometimes, mostly when people are unkind about it, but it's part of who I am now." Hannah nodded with the simple acceptance children often showed before society. Taught them judgment. "I can show you the kittens in the barn. They don't mind how anyone walks." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside Eleanor, the first genuine one in longer than she cared to remember. "I'd like that very much, Hannah. Perhaps after I've settled in?" Samuel watched this exchange with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. "Hannah, go tell Mrs. Whitaker we have a guest for supper, then help her set the table." As Hannah ran toward the house, Samuel unloaded Eleanor's suitcase from the wagon. "The guest cabin is this way," he said, nodding toward a small structure near the orchard. "It's simple but sound." The cabin proved to be a single room with surprising charm. A neatly made bed with a colorful quilt, a small table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and a window overlooking the orchard. Someone had placed a jar of wildflowers on the table, their bright colors welcoming against the rustic wood. "Mrs. Whitaker keeps it ready for visitors," Samuel explained, setting down her suitcase, "though we don't get many." "It's perfect," Eleanor said sincerely. "Truly, Mr. Thornton, I don't know how to thank you." "Sam," he corrected. "Mr. Thornton was my father, and I never much cared for him." A shadow crossed his face, there and gone so quickly Eleanor wondered if she'd imagined it. "Supper's at 6. The washroom is behind the main house if you'd like to freshen up." Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day crashing over her like a wave. William Parker's rejection, the crowd's mockery, and now this unexpected sanctuary. It was almost too much to process. She removed her glasses, pressing the heels of her hands against tired eyes. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself, the mantra that had carried her through recovery, through years of teaching children who sometimes mocked her limp, through building a life of dignity despite society's determination to marginalize her. Just one day at a time. She unpacked her few belongings, 3 simple dresses, undergarments, a shawl, her mother's silver hairbrush, and most precious of all, the books she couldn't bear to sell. Dickens, Austen, a volume of Whitman's poetry, and several educational texts she'd used in teaching. Each represented hours of escape, of learning, of worldviews beyond her physical limitations. By the time she made her way to the main house, the sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the yard. Eleanor paused before climbing the porch steps, adjusting her glasses and smoothing her hair, which she'd repinned neatly. She changed into her best dress, a deep blue that her mother had always said brought out the warmth in her eyes. The door opened before she could knock, revealing a plump, silver-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "There you are, dear. I'm Mrs. Whitaker. Come in before the biscuits get cold." The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of fresh bread and something savory bubbling on the stove. Hannah sat at the table already, swinging her legs and arranging silverware with careful precision. Sam stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. "Miss Morgan," he acknowledged with a nod. "Please, call me Eleanor," she replied, or Ellie, as my students used to. "You're a teacher?" Mrs. Whitaker asked, gesturing for Eleanor to take a seat. "I was in Philadelphia for nearly 8 years." Hannah's eyes widened. "A real teacher? With a schoolhouse and everything?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, with a schoolhouse and everything. I taught children your age to read and write, to understand numbers and history and the natural world." "We don't have a teacher here," Hannah said mournfully. "Pa teaches me my letters, and Mrs. Whitaker helps with sums, but Pa says I need proper schooling." Sam set plates on the table, his movements efficient and practiced. "Pine Ridge has been trying to recruit a teacher for 2 years now. The last one left after a single winter. Claimed Montana was too wild for civilized education." Mrs. Whitaker snorted as she placed a steaming platter of chicken on the table. That woman was afraid of her own shadow. Called the coyotes wolves and thought Indians were hiding behind every tree. Sam's mouth quirked in amusement. "To be fair, sometimes I was." Eleanor glanced between them, catching the easy affection in their banter. Mrs. Whitaker swatted his arm with a dishcloth. "Don't you start that nonsense again. You're about as threatening as a jackrabbit." To Eleanor, she explained, "I've known this boy since he was in short pants. His mother was my dearest friend." As they ate, Eleanor found herself relaxing into the simple warmth of their company. No one commented when she occasionally fumbled. With her fork, her right hand sometimes affected by the same illness that had marked her leg, no one stared at her prematurely grey hair or the thickness of her spectacles. Instead, they asked about Philadelphia, about her teaching experiences, about books she'd read and places she'd seen. It was Hannah who finally broached the subject Eleanor had been avoiding. "Why did Mr. Parker not want you? Harriet Finch at the general store said he sent away for a bride, but changed his mind when he saw her." "Hannah," Sam admonished, but Eleanor shook her head. "It's all right," she said. "Children deserve honest answers." She turned to Hannah. "Mr. Parker was expecting someone different, someone younger, prettier, without glasses or a limp. Sometimes people care more about appearances than what's inside." Hannah frowned, clearly troubled by this concept. "But that's not fair." "No," Eleanor agreed softly. "It isn't." "People fear what's different," Sam said unexpectedly. "They're threatened by anything that doesn't fit their narrow idea of how things should be." His words carried the weight of personal experience, and Eleanor found herself studying his face, the proud angle of his cheekbones, the slight copper undertone to his skin that marked his mixed heritage. In Philadelphia, such features would have relegated him to the margins of society, much as her limp and plain appearance had done to her. "What will you do now?" Mrs. Whitaker asked gently, passing Eleanor another biscuit. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Eleanor had spent every penny on the journey west, had given up her teaching position and living arrangements. The reality of her situation settled cold in her stomach. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some savings, but not enough for immediate passage back east, and truthfully, there's little for me to return to." Sam leaned forward, elbows on the table, regarding her thoughtfully. "Pine Ridge needs a teacher." Eleanor blinked, surprised by the directness of his suggestion. "After today's welcome, I doubt the town would accept me in such a position." "Some might not," he acknowledged, "but many families here are desperate for education for their children. Pride has limits when futures are at stake." Hannah bounced in her chair. "You could teach me and my friends, please, Miss Ellie." Eleanor felt a familiar spark, the same one that had first drawn her to teaching, the possibility of shaping young minds, of making a difference. But experience had taught her caution. "It's not that simple, Hannah. A school needs a building, books, supplies, and the town would need to approve my appointment." Sam's expression grew determined. The old church has a side room they've been saving for a school. As for approval, he shrugged. Towns don't survive out here without education. They'll come around. Mrs. Whitaker patted Eleanor's hand. Stay a while, dear. Give Pine Ridge a chance to show its better nature. As the conversation shifted to other topics, Eleanor found herself considering possibilities she hadn't imagined when she'd stepped off the train that morning. The rejection that had seemed so final might perhaps be merely a detour rather than an ending. Later, walking back to the guest cabin with a borrowed lantern lighting her way, Eleanor paused to look up at the night sky. Stars scattered across the darkness in numbers she'd never seen in Philadelphia, where city lights and coal smoke obscured all but the brightest. The vastness made her feel small, yet strangely unburdened. From the main house, lamplight glowed, warm in windows. Beyond, the mountains stood as silent witnesses to generations of human struggles and triumphs. What was her small rejection against such timelessness? One day at a time, she reminded herself, continuing her uneven walk toward the cabin, where she would sleep and rise to face whatever tomorrow might bring in this unexpected place with these unexpected people who had offered her sanctuary when she needed it most. Morning light filtered through the cabin's small window, rousing Eleanor from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. The unfamiliar ceiling, the scent of pine and fresh air instead of Philadelphia's coal-tinged dampness. Then memory returned. The disastrous arrival, William Parker's rejection, and the unexpected sanctuary offered by Samuel Thornton. Eleanor rose, wincing slightly as she put weight on her weaker leg, always stiffer in the morning. Through the window, she could see activity already underway at the ranch. Sam leading horses from the barn, Mrs. Whitaker hanging laundry on a line strung between two trees, Hannah skipping with a jump rope near the garden. The scene radiated a peaceful industry that tugged at something long dormant within Eleanor. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a sage green that her mother had sewn for her 24th birthday, and arranged her hair as neatly as possible, securing the graying strands in a practical bun. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand remained unchanged, plain features, eyes magnified by spectacles. Yet somehow in this new setting, the familiar face seemed less a burden than simply a fact, like the weather or the mountains visible through her window. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Hannah stood on the threshold, barely containing her excitement. Pa says to tell you breakfast is ready if you're hungry. We have flapjacks with real maple syrup that Mrs. Whitaker trades for with her jam. Eleanor smiled, charmed by the child's enthusiasm. That sounds wonderful. Thank you for coming to get me. Hannah fell into step beside her as they walked toward the main house, adapting naturally to Eleanor's slower pace. Pa says you might teach me school lessons. Is that true? Your father mentioned the possibility, Eleanor acknowledged. Would you like that? Oh, yes. Hannah nodded vigorously, dark braids bouncing. I can already read some and do sums up to 20, and Pa's been teaching me about plants and animals. But there's so much more to learn. The eagerness in the child's voice resonated with Eleanor's teacher's heart. This was the pure hunger for knowledge she'd always tried to nurture in her students, untainted by social pressures or judgments about who was worthy of education. What would you most like to learn about? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. Hannah considered this with adorable seriousness. Maps, she decided. I want to know about all the places in the world and how rivers start in mountains and where all the countries are. Pa has a book with maps, but he says they're changing all the time as new places get discovered. Eleanor laughed softly. Geography has always been one of my favorite subjects too. Perhaps we could start there. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of coffee and hot flapjacks. Mrs. Whitaker stood at the stove, expertly flipping another golden disc onto an already impressive stack. Sam sat at the table, a mug of coffee in one hand, the other marking his place in a ledger book filled with neat columns of figures. "Good morning," Eleanor greeted them. "Hannah tells me there are flapjacks to be had." Sam looked up and Eleanor was struck again by the unusual amber of his eyes, like sunlight through whiskey. "Sleep well?" he asked, closing the ledger. "Better than I have in ages," she admitted. "The quiet is remarkable after city noise." Mrs. Whitaker gestured for her to sit. "Eat up while they're hot. Men'll be coming to help with the new corral today, and there's plenty to do." Eleanor accepted a plate piled with more food than she usually ate in a day, noticing how neither Sam nor Mrs. Whitaker seemed to expect her to be dainty or apologetic about appetite, the way Philadelphia society often demanded of women. She ate with genuine pleasure, listening as Sam outlined the day's work to Hannah. "After breakfast, I need you to help Mrs. Whitaker gather eggs and pick beans from the garden," he instructed. "Then you can show Miss Eleanor around the ranch if she's interested." "I'd like that very much," Eleanor said. "And please call me Ellie, all of you." Sam nodded, the gesture somehow more meaningful, coming from a man of so few words. "Ellie, then." After breakfast, Eleanor insisted on helping with the dishes, despite Mrs. Whitaker's protests. "I'm not a guest to be coddled," she said firmly. "If I'm to stay even a short while, I should contribute." Mrs. Whitaker relented with a knowing smile. "Stubborn, aren't you? Good. You'll need that here." While Hannah completed her morning chores, Eleanor explored the farmhouse, drawn to a small bookshelf in what appeared to be Sam's study. The collection was modest, but surprisingly varied. Practical manuals on animal husbandry and agriculture, interspersed with volumes of poetry, history, and several classics. Her fingers traced the spine of Whitman's Leaves of Grass, a personal favorite. "My mother's," Sam's voice came from the doorway. "She believed education was the one thing that couldn't be stolen from a person." Eleanor turned, embarrassed, to be caught examining his private things. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." He waved away her apology. "Books are meant to be read. Feel free to borrow anything that interests you." Eleanor's gaze fell on a volume about local flora. "I'd like to learn about the plants here. They're so different from back east." Sam stepped into the room, selecting the book and handing it to her. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, a moment of contact that Eleanor felt with unexpected intensity. "My mother marked her favorite wildflowers," he said. "She knew uses for all of them, medicinal, practical, decorative. The Blackfoot have centuries of such knowledge." Curiosity overcame Eleanor's usual reticence about personal questions. "You mentioned your mother yesterday. Was she—" "Yeah. Half Blackfoot, half French-Canadian," Sam confirmed. "My father was Boston Irish, come west to make his fortune. They scandalized everyone by marrying, but they were devoted to each other until she died." The complexity of his heritage explained much about Sam's position in Pine Ridge, not fully accepted by either world, creating his own place at the margins. Eleanor recognized the strategy from her own life, navigating between ability and disability, never quite fitting the expected mold. "And your father?" she asked. Something hardened in Sam's expression. "Died 10 years ago. We weren't close after my mother passed." Eleanor sensed deeper currents beneath his simple statement, but respected his reticence. "Thank you for the book. I'll take good care of it." Later, with Hannah as an enthusiastic guide, Eleanor explored the ranch. The property extended further than she'd initially realized. Beyond the main house and barn lay the apple orchard, a kitchen garden abundant with vegetables, fields where cattle grazed, and a creek that bubbled cheerfully over smooth stones. Hannah introduced each location with proprietary pride, explaining which apples made the best pies, which cow gave the richest milk, where trout could be caught in the deeper pools of the creek. And over there, Hannah pointed to a distant hill, is where the wildflowers grow thickest in spring. Pa says it's because that's where grandmother's spirit visits. Eleanor glanced at the girl. You believe that? Hannah shrugged. Pa says there are many ways to understand the world, and we shouldn't discount any of them too quickly. Grandmother was Blackfoot, and they believe spirits stay close to the places and people they loved. The simple wisdom in this philosophy struck Eleanor deeply. Perhaps there was something to be said for a worldview that made room for multiple truths rather than rigid certainties. Their tour concluded at the barn, where Sam and several ranch hands were unloading timber from wagons. Eleanor watched from a distance, admiring the efficiency of their movements, the easy camaraderie evident in their banter. Sam worked alongside his men, rather than directing from a distance, his strength apparent in the casual way he shouldered loads that took two others to manage. Your father works hard, Eleanor observed to Hannah. Hardest worker in Montana Territory, the child agreed with absolute conviction. That's what everyone says, even people who don't like him. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. People don't like your father? Hannah kicked at a clump of grass. Some people in town call him names because of grandmother. They say mean things about half-breeds and savages. It's stupid. The fierceness in the young girl's defense of her father touched Eleanor deeply. Yes, she agreed. It is stupid. People often fear what they don't understand or what's different from themselves. Like how they were mean about your leg and glasses, Hannah asked, with a child's direct honesty. Just like that, Eleanor confirmed. Hannah was quiet for a moment, then slipped her small hand into Eleanor's. I'm glad you came here, even if it wasn't what you planned. The simple gesture of acceptance brought a lump to Eleanor's throat. So am I, Hannah. So am I. That evening, as they again gathered for supper, Eleanor noticed Sam watching her interactions with Hannah, his expression thoughtful. The girl had hardly left Eleanor's side all day, peppering her with questions about Philadelphia, about teaching, about books she'd read, and places she'd seen. Eleanor had answered each inquiry patiently, expanding Hannah's knowledge while respecting her intelligence, the same approach she'd always taken with her students. After Hannah had been tucked into bed, Sam invited Eleanor to join him on the porch. The evening was mild, stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the only sounds being the distant lowing of cattle and the rhythmic creaking of Sam's rocking chair. You're good with her, he said finally. Hannah, I mean. She's not usually so comfortable with strangers. She's a remarkable child, Eleanor replied. Bright, curious, kind. You've done well raising her. Sam's gaze remained on the distant mountains. I worry that she's too isolated here. Mrs. Whitaker does her best with lessons, and I teach her what I can, but she deserves a proper education. Eleanor sensed the opening he was creating, but waited, allowing him to reach the point in his own time. The town council meets tomorrow afternoon, he continued. They've been discussing the need for a teacher for months. I could speak on your behalf, if you're interested. The offer hung between them in the cooling evening air. Eleanor considered it carefully, weighing the prospect of rejection against the potential for purpose. Why would they consider me? She asked frankly. After yesterday's reception, I can't imagine William Parker supporting my appointment. Sam's mouth quirked in what might have been a suppressed smile. Parker doesn't control the council, though he'd like to think he does. Many families here are more concerned with their children's futures than with appearances. Eleanor looked out at the vast landscape, so different from the cramped, smoky confines of Philadelphia. Despite the public humiliation of her arrival, she felt a growing attachment to this place. Its raw beauty, its openness, the possibility of starting fresh where people might eventually judge her on merit rather than physical limitations. Would I stay here, at the ranch? she asked, practical concerns surfacing. Sam nodded. Until the town can arrange proper accommodations. Usually the teacher boards with different families throughout the year, but given the circumstances. He didn't need to elaborate. Eleanor understood the complexity of her position, a single woman, abandoned by her intended husband, now potentially employed in a public role. Appearances mattered, even on the frontier. "I'd pay rent, of course," she said firmly. "I won't be a charity case." Something like respect flickered in Sam's eyes. "Never thought you would be." He rose, stretching slightly. "Think about it overnight. Let me know in the morning." But Eleanor had already decided. Teaching was the one thing she knew she did. Well, the work that gave her life meaning beyond society's narrow expectations. "I don't need until morning. If you believe the council might consider me, I'd like to try." Sam studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Then he nodded once, decisively. "I'll pick you up at 1 o'clock tomorrow." The following day dawned clear and warm, anxiety fluttering in Eleanor's stomach as she prepared for the council meeting. She chose her most severe dress, a dark navy that lent her a professional appearance, and pinned her hair in a tight, no-nonsense bun. If she couldn't be pretty, she could at least project competence and dignity. Mrs. Whitaker fussed over her. "Breakfast. Eat properly, girl. You'll need your strength to face those old mules on the council." Hannah watched wide-eyed as Eleanor checked and rechecked the contents of the small satchel she'd prepare, copies of her teaching credentials, letters of recommendation from the headmaster of her Philadelphia school, sample lesson plans she'd hastily reconstructed from memory. "You'll convince them," Hannah said with absolute certainty. "You know more than anybody in Pine Ridge." By 1 o'clock, Eleanor stood waiting on the porch, outwardly composed despite her inner turmoil. Sam arrived punctually, driving a small buggy rather than the work wagon they'd used previously. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His hair neatly tied back, his usual work clothes replaced by a clean shirt and vest, boots polished to a respectable shine. "You look nice," Eleanor said without thinking, then blushed at her forwardness. "Clean, at least," Sam replied with a hint of self-deprecation. "Figured we'd make the best impression possible." The ride to town passed mostly in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As the buildings of Pine Ridge came into view, Eleanor felt her courage falter slightly. Yesterday's humiliation remained fresh, the prospect of facing those same townspeople daunting. Sam seemed to sense her unease. "Remember why you're doing this," he said quietly. "Not for their approval, but because you have something valuable to offer." His simple reassurance steadied her. When they reached the town hall, a modest wooden building that also served as the church on Sundays, Eleanor descended from the buggy with her head high, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. Inside, the council had already assembled. 5 men seated at a long table, all watching with undisguised curiosity as Sam ushered Eleanor into the room. William Parker sat among them, his expression souring visibly at their entrance. The oldest of the men, white-bearded and bespectacled, called the meeting to order. "Samuel Thornton, I understand you've brought a candidate for the teaching position?" Sam stepped forward. "Mayor Jenkins, council members, this is Miss Eleanor Morgan. She's a qualified teacher with 8 years' experience at a respected Philadelphia school. She's prepared to present her credentials for your consideration." William Parker interrupted, his voice sharp with displeasure. "This is highly irregular. Miss Morgan came to Pine Ridge under false pretenses as my potential bride. She's a stranger to our community with no established character references." Mayor Jenkins peered at Parker over his spectacles. "I was under the impression, Mr. Parker, that you had terminated your arrangement with Miss Morgan upon her arrival." Parker shifted uncomfortably. "That's correct, but then she's free to seek employment where she wishes," Jenkins concluded. "Let's hear what the lady has to say." Eleanor stepped forward, willing her voice to remain steady. Gentlemen, I understand your hesitation. I arrived in Pine Ridge under circumstances that have now changed. However, my qualifications remain valid. She opened her satchel, producing her papers. I'm certified to teach all elementary subjects, with particular expertise in literature, mathematics, and natural sciences. I've instructed children from ages 6 to 16 and have experience with students of varying abilities and backgrounds. The council members examined her credentials, murmuring among themselves. One man, younger than the others, looked up with genuine interest. My sons struggled with their letters when we tried schooling them at home. Could you help children who are behind? Absolutely, Eleanor assured him. Every child learns differently. My approach has always been to adapt methods to the individual, students' needs, rather than expecting all children to progress at the same pace. Another council member, a weathered man with a blacksmith's powerful build, frowned skeptically. Pine Ridge ain't Philadelphia, Miss Morgan. Our children need practical knowledge, figures for trading and farming, reading for contracts and newspapers. We don't need fancy education that won't serve them here. Eleanor met his gaze directly. Sir, education isn't about location. It's about expanding possibilities. I would teach the fundamentals thoroughly, yes, but also help your children understand the wider world. Knowledge is never wasted, whether applied in a city or on a frontier. The blacksmith's expression remained dubious, but he didn't argue further. William Parker, however, was not finished. There's also the matter of Miss Morgan's physical condition. Teaching requires stamina and authority. Her limitations might prevent her from maintaining proper discipline. The words stung, but Eleanor had faced such prejudice before. Before she could respond, Sam stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. Miss Morgan managed a classroom of 40 children in Philadelphia without difficulty. Unless Pine Ridge children are particularly unruly, I doubt she'll find our 20 students overwhelming. His gaze swept the council, challenging. Unless, of course, the council believes physical strength is more important in a teacher than intelligence, experience, and dedication. A tense silence followed this pointed comment. Mayor Jenkins broke it with a thoughtful hum. Miss Morgan, if appointed, how soon could you begin instruction? Hope flickered within Eleanor. Immediately, sir. I would need to review what materials are available and establish a curriculum based on the children's current knowledge, but I could begin basic lessons next week. The mayor nodded, then turned to his colleagues. Shall we put it to a vote? William Parker made one final attempt. Mayor Jenkins, surely we should advertise the position more widely before making such a hasty decision. There may be other, more suitable candidates available. We've been advertising for 6 months, William, the blacksmith pointed out. My youngest is 8 and still can't read his own name properly. How much longer would you have us wait? The vote proceeded, each council member stating their position clearly. 3 in favor, 1 opposed, Parker, predictably, and 1 abstention. Mayor Jenkins smiled at Eleanor, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. Miss Morgan, Pine Ridge, would be pleased to employ you as our school teacher, starting immediately at a salary of $40 per month, with room and board to be arranged. Do you accept these terms? Relief and triumph surged through Eleanor. I do, Mayor Jenkins. Thank you for this opportunity. As they exited the town hall, Sam placed a hand briefly on Eleanor's shoulder, a gesture of congratulation that sent an unexpected warmth through her. You were impressive in there, he said. Didn't let Parker rattle you. I've had plenty of practice standing my ground, Eleanor replied. Though I confess, your defense was unexpected and appreciated. Sam's expression darkened slightly. Parker's the same kind of man who looked down on my mother for her heritage. Different target, same narrow mind. They had reached the buggy, when William Parker emerged from the town hall, making directly for them. His face was flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. "You've made a grave mistake, Thornton," he said, voice low but intense. "This woman is wholly unsuitable for Pine Ridge. The better families won't stand for it." Sam's posture shifted subtly, a quiet warning in his stance. "The better families just voted 3-1 to hire her, Parker. Your opinion seems to be the minority view." Parker's gaze shifted to Eleanor, cold with dislike. "You may have secured this position through Thornton's influence, Miss Morgan, but don't imagine you'll find acceptance here. Pine Ridge has standards." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "So do I, Mr. Parker. My standard is to judge people by their character rather than their appearance or circumstances. Perhaps if you'd applied the same principle yesterday, we might have avoided this unpleasantness entirely." Parker's face darkened further, but Mayor Jenkins emerged from the hall behind him, preventing whatever response he might have made. Instead, he turned on his heel and strode away, back rigid with affront. "Looks like you've made yourself an enemy, Miss Morgan," Jenkins observed, approaching with a friendly smile. "William Parker has a long memory for slights, real or imagined." "I didn't come to Pine Ridge seeking enemies, Mayor Jenkins," Eleanor replied. "But neither will I bow to unjust treatment." The mayor's eyes twinkled appreciatively. "Good. We need more spine around here." He handed her a large iron key. "This opens the side room of the church where we've been planning the school. It's modest, but there are benches, a blackboard, and some books donated by families. Feel free to examine it and make a list of whatever else you need." Sam helped Eleanor into the buggy, their exchange with Parker having attracted attention from townspeople going about their business. Curious eyes followed them as they made their way to the church at the end of the main street, a simple white building with a small steeple and adjacent room built of the same clapboard. The schoolroom was indeed modest, a single space perhaps, 20 feet square, with windows along one wall providing decent light. 10 rough-hewn benches faced a small elevated platform where a teacher's desk and chair stood. A blackboard hung on the wall, and a small bookshelf contained perhaps 30 volumes of varying conditions. Eleanor moved through the space, mentally, cataloguing needs, chalk, proper writing slates for the children, more books covering a broader range of subjects, maps, a globe if possible. Despite its simplicity, the room radiated possibility. Sam watched her from the doorway. "Will it serve?" "It will more than serve," Eleanor replied, running a hand along the teacher's desk. "It's a beginning. With time, it can become a proper schoolroom." "The children will come," Sam said, certainty in his voice. "Word travels fast here. By week's end, every family within 10 miles will know Pine Ridge has a teacher again." Eleanor turned to him, a question that had been forming in her mind finally finding voice. "Why did you help me, Mr. Thornton? You could have simply left me to William Parker's dismissal. It would have been simpler." Sam considered her for a long moment, his amber eyes thoughtful. "Simpler isn't always right. My mother used to say that the true measure of a community is how it treats those at the margins, the different, the vulnerable, the outsiders." A faint smile softened his usually stern features. "Besides, Hannah needs a teacher, and I suspect Pine Ridge needs someone like you to shake things up a bit." The frankness of his assessment struck Eleanor as refreshingly honest. Not charity or pity, but recognition of mutual benefit. She needed a place, Pine Ridge needed a teacher, and Hannah needed education. It was a foundation she could build upon without shame. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll do my best to justify your confidence." As they rode back to Evergreen Ranch, Eleanor's mind raced with plans for her new role. She would need to assess the children's current knowledge, develop appropriate lessons for multiple age groups, establish rules and expectations. The practical challenges energized rather than daunted her. This was familiar territory, the work she knew best. Hannah was waiting on the porch when they returned, practically bouncing with impatience. "Well, did they say yes? Are you going to be our teacher?" Eleanor couldn't help smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "Yes, Hannah. Classes will begin next week." The girl let out a whoop of joy, racing into the house to share the news with Mrs. Whittaker. Sam watched her go, affection plain on his face. "I haven't seen her this excited since Christmas," he observed. That evening, as Eleanor sat on the porch of her cabin, making lists by lantern light of everything she would need for the school, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had arrived in Pine Ridge, expecting to become William Parker's wife. Now she was Pine Ridge's schoolteacher, living on the ranch of a man whose entire existence challenged the narrow conventions that had constrained her own life. The moon rose slowly over the mountains, bathing the landscape in silver light. In the main house, lamps still glowed warmly in the windows. From her small cabin, Eleanor could see Sam moving about in his study, likely reviewing the ledgers she'd noticed earlier. The distance between them seemed both literal and metaphorical, each in their separate spaces, yet connected by unlikely circumstance and growing mutual respect. For the first time since arriving in Montana territory, Eleanor felt the knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. She had purpose again, work that mattered, and perhaps the beginnings of a place where she might belong. It wasn't what she had planned or expected, but as she looked out over the moonlit valley, she couldn't help thinking it might be something better. A life defined by contribution rather than compromise, by possibility rather than limitation. With that comforting thought, she returned to her lists, planning for the future that now stretched before her, different than imagined, but suddenly rich with promise. The first day of school in Pine Ridge dawned crisp and clear, autumn sunlight gilding the distant mountains. Eleanor stood before the modest schoolhouse an hour early, key trembling slightly in her hand as she unlocked the door. The past week had been a whirlwind of preparation, cleaning the long-neglected room, arranging the meager supplies, and creating lessons suitable for students of various ages and abilities. Word had spread quickly throughout the area. 23 children were expected today, ranging from 6 to 16 years old, with educational backgrounds as varied as their families. Some had attended school before in other towns, others had received only rudimentary home instruction, and a few had never held a book or pencil for academic purposes. Eleanor moved through the room, making final adjustments, placing the primer readers for younger children on the front benches, more advanced texts toward the back for older students. On her desk sat a polished red apple, a gift from Hannah, picked specially from the Evergreen ranch orchard. The simple gesture had touched Eleanor deeply, a symbol of the child's excitement about formal lessons. The sound of approaching voices broke the morning quiet. Eleanor smoothed her best dress, a deep burgundy that lent authority to her modest appearance, and took a steadying breath. This moment represented everything she had worked toward since arriving in Pine Ridge. The opportunity to prove her worth beyond physical appearances, to contribute meaningfully to her new community. The door creaked open, revealing a cluster of children accompanied by their parents. Hesitation marked their expressions as they regarded the unfamiliar teacher. With her spectacles and noticeable limp, Eleanor straightened her shoulders and smiled warmly. "Good morning," she greeted them. "I'm Miss Morgan. Welcome to school." Over the next half hour, the room filled with curious children and assessing parents. Eleanor met each family with the same confident courtesy, learning names, noting ages, and answering questions about her teaching methods. Most parents seemed cautiously optimistic, though a few, particularly those from what Hannah had called the better families, maintained a reserved skepticism. Harriet Finch, the woman who had mocked Eleanor's appearance at the train station, arrived with twin boys of about 10. Her pinched expression suggested she found the entire situation distasteful. "My husband insisted the boys attend," she explained to another mother, voice deliberately carrying. "Personally, I have reservations about Miss Morgan's qualifications, but Mr. Finch says even inadequate education is better than none." Eleanor pretended not to hear, focusing instead on welcoming a shy little girl with auburn braids. Years of teaching had taught her that parents' attitudes often reflected in their children's behavior. She would need to win over not just the students, but the community they represented. Finally, Sam arrived with Hannah, who practically bounced with excitement. Unlike most parents, who quickly departed after delivering their children, Sam lingered in the doorway. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly, amber eyes scanning the room as if assessing potential threats. Eleanor appreciated his concern, but recognized the importance of establishing her independence. "We're fine, Mr. Thornton. Hannah is in good hands." He nodded, seeming to understand what she left unsaid. With a gentle pat to Hannah's shoulder and a last, lingering glance at Eleanor, he departed, leaving her to face her first class alone. Eleanor rang the small bell on her desk, bringing immediate silence as 23 pairs of eyes fixed upon her with expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness to outright challenge. "Welcome to the first day of school," she began, voice clear and steady. "I know some of you have studied before, while others are just beginning your educational journey. That's perfectly all right. In this room, we all have something to learn and something to teach." She moved from behind her desk, making no attempt to hide her limp as she approached the children. "You've likely noticed I walk differently than most. When I was a child, I became ill with polio, which affected my leg. Some of you may have questions about that, and that's natural. You may ask me privately if you wish, but in this classroom we will focus on learning rather than appearances." A freckled boy in the back row raised his hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, my cousin had the polio and he can't walk at all. How come you can?" The directness of the question might have offended some, but Eleanor recognized genuine curiosity rather than malice. "I was fortunate, Timothy. The illness affects people differently. I recovered enough to walk, though not without difficulty." She smiled reassuringly. "Just as some of you may find reading easy while others excel at mathematics, our bodies have different strengths and challenges too." This simple explanation seemed to satisfy the children, the mysterious ailment now demystified and therefore less distracting. Eleanor proceeded with her first lesson, a reading assessment for the older children, while the younger ones practiced writing their names and basic letters. By midday, Eleanor had begun to form a clear picture of her students' abilities. Hannah proved to be among the more advanced readers for her age, a testament to Sam's dedication to her education. The Finch twins were bright but undisciplined, more interested in mischief than learning. Several of the ranch children demonstrated practical knowledge far beyond their years, though their formal education had been limited by circumstance. As she dismissed the children for their midday meal, Eleanor felt cautiously optimistic. Despite the initial wariness, most had engaged willingly with her lessons, and even the more resistant students had maintained basic politeness. The afternoon passed in a similar fashion. Structured lessons for reading and arithmetic, followed by a natural science discussion about local wildlife that had even the most restless children contributing eagerly. When the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Eleanor was exhausted but satisfied. The first day had gone as well as could be expected, perhaps better. Parents began arriving to collect younger children, many lingering to hear about their progress. Eleanor provided honest but encouraging assessments, emphasizing each child's strengths while noting areas for improvement. This approach seemed To reassure most parents, though Harriet Finch received her lukewarm report on the twins' behavior with pursed lips and a sniff of disapproval. As the schoolroom emptied, only Hannah remained, organizing books on the shelves as Eleanor had requested. The girl worked diligently, humming softly to herself. "Your father is late," Eleanor observed, checking the small clock on her desk. Hannah shook her head. "Pa said I should wait with you until you're ready to leave. He's sending Tom with the buggy at 4 o'clock to bring us both home." The arrangement surprised Eleanor. "That's very thoughtful, but I had planned to stay and prepare tomorrow's lessons." "Pa said you might say that," Hannah replied, with a knowing smile that made her seem older than her years. "He said to remind you that you can prepare lessons at home just as well, and Mrs. Whittaker is making venison stew for supper." Eleanor laughed despite herself. Sam Thornton was proving surprisingly perceptive about her habits after just a week's acquaintance. "Well, I wouldn't want to miss Mrs. Whittaker's stew, but we have half an hour before Tom arrives. Shall we use it for your first geography lesson?" Hannah's face lit with enthusiasm. "Yes, please." They bent over a worn atlas Eleanor had found among the donated books, tracing coastlines and mountain ranges with careful fingers. Hannah absorbed information like parched soil taking rain, her questions thoughtful and often startlingly insightful for a child her age. "You have a fine mind, Hannah Thornton," Eleanor said sincerely. "You remind me of myself at your age, always wanting to know what lay beyond the next page, the next horizon." Hannah beamed at the comparison. "Pa says I got my curiosity from grandmother. He says she was the smartest person he ever knew, even though she never went to school." "Different kinds of education have different values," Eleanor agreed. "Book learning is important, but so is the knowledge your grandmother had of plants and animals, seasons and survival." A sharp rap at the door interrupted their discussion. Tom Calloway, Sam's ranch foreman, stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Morgan, Hannah, the buggy's ready whenever you are." Eleanor gathered her materials while Hannah collected her slate and primers. The ride back to Evergreen Ranch was pleasant, the afternoon sun warming the cooling air as Tom regaled them with a humorous story about a particularly stubborn calf that had led the hands on a merry chase that morning. Arriving at the ranch, Eleanor was surprised to see several horses tethered outside the main house that she didn't recognize. Tom's expression tightened slightly at the sight. "Visitors?" Eleanor asked. "Parker," Tom replied, the single word, laden with disapproval. "And Judge Hollister from the county seat." Eleanor felt a flutter of unease. William Parker had made no secret of his opposition to her appointment as teacher. His presence, alongside a county judge, seemed unlikely. To be social in nature, Hannah frowned. "I don't like Mr. Parker. He was mean to Miss Ellie." "Hush now," Tom cautioned, though his expression suggested agreement. "Best behavior around the judge. He's an important man." As they approached the house, the front door opened. Sam emerged, followed by William Parker and an elderly, distinguished-looking man Eleanor assumed was Judge Hollister. Sam's face was set in the neutral expression she had come to recognize as his mask for anger or frustration. "Ah, Miss Morgan," Parker said, false cordiality dripping from his words. "How fortunate. We were just discussing you." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze steadily. "Mr. Parker, Judge Hollister, I presume. I'm Eleanor Morgan, Pine Ridge's new teacher." The judge assessed her with keen grey eyes that missed nothing. "So I've been informed. Mr. Parker has raised some concerns about your appointment." Sam stepped forward. "Which I've already addressed. The town council approved Miss Morgan's position by proper vote." Judge Hollister nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed. though Mr. Parker suggests the process was rushed and potentially influenced by your personal interest in the matter. Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks at the implication. Judge Hollister, I assure you my qualifications are substantial and verifiable. I taught for 8 years at the Fairchild Academy in Philadelphia and can provide references attesting to my competence. The issue, Parker interjected smoothly, is not merely qualification, but suitability. A teacher shapes young minds and must exemplify proper values and appearances. Miss Morgan's condition raises questions about her ability to maintain discipline and respect. The familiar sting of prejudice tightened Eleanor's chest, but before she could respond, Sam spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. Miss Morgan completed her first day teaching 23 children of various ages and abilities. By all accounts, including my daughters, she managed admirably. His gaze hardened as he looked at Parker. Unless you're suggesting that a physical impairment somehow affects her intelligence or character. Judge Hollister raised a placating hand. Gentlemen, please. Miss Morgan, I wonder if I might speak with you privately. Perhaps a tour of this schoolroom I've heard so much about? Eleanor recognized the request for what it was. An opportunity for assessment away from competing influences. Of course, Judge, I'd be happy to show you our facilities tomorrow morning before classes begin. The judge smiled, apparently satisfied with this arrangement. Excellent. Shall we say 7 o'clock? That should allow ample time before your students arrive. 7 it is, Eleanor agreed, relieved that the confrontation seemed to be diffusing. Parker, however, was not finished. Judge, surely you can see that this entire situation is irregular. A woman arrives as a mail-order bride, is rejected for misrepresenting herself, and within days secures a position of authority through the patronage of a man with questionable heritage. The naked prejudice in his statement shocked Eleanor, though Sam's expression remained impassive, as if he'd heard such comments too often to react visibly. Judge Hollister's bushy eyebrows rose. Mr. Parker, I make judgments based on facts and law, not rumor or personal grievance. I will assess Miss Morgan's qualifications and suitability tomorrow. He turned to Sam with a slight bow. Mr. Thornton, thank you for your hospitality. I'll take a room at the hotel in town tonight. You're welcome to stay here, Judge, Sam offered. We have plenty of space. The judge smiled but shook his head. Best to maintain impartiality in these matters. Good evening to you all. As the men departed, Eleanor remained on the porch, anxiety churning in her stomach. So much depended on the judge's assessment, not just her livelihood, but her place in this community she was cautiously beginning to think of as home. Sam joined her after seeing the visitors to their horses. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Parker's been nursing his wounded pride. Apparently it festered enough that he felt compelled to involve the county judge. Will Judge Hollister be fair? Eleanor asked, voicing her primary concern. Sam considered this. He has a reputation for fairness, yes. He's old school, values education and propriety, but he's not known to hold prejudices like Parker's. He glanced at Eleanor. Just be yourself tomorrow. Your qualifications and character speak for themselves. Later that evening, after a subdued dinner during which even Hannah seemed to sense the tension, Eleanor retreated to her cabin to prepare for tomorrow's crucial evaluation. She laid out her teaching certificates, reviews from the headmaster at Fairchild Academy, and sample lesson plans. Everything was in order, yet anxiety persisted like a stone in her stomach. A soft knock at the cabin door startled her. She opened it to find Sam standing there, a leather-bound book in his hands. I thought this might help, he said, offering the volume. It belonged to my mother, her journal from when she taught Blackfoot children against considerable opposition. Different circumstances, but perhaps similar challenges. Eleanor accepted the book with surprise. This seems very personal. Are you sure? Sam nodded, his expression softening in the lamplight. She would have liked you, I think. Your determination reminds me of her. The simple compliment warmed Eleanor more than she expected. Thank you. I'll take good care of it. He lingered a moment longer, seeming on the verge of saying something more, then simply nodded and turned to go. Good. Luck tomorrow, Ellie. For what it's worth, the children came home full of stories about their new teacher. You've made quite an impression already. After he left, Eleanor opened the journal with reverent hands. The pages contained the elegant script of an educated woman navigating a world hostile to her very existence. Night Wind, as Sam's mother had been called, wrote of creating a school in a corner of the tribal council lodge, of teaching children to read in English while preserving their native language, of facing white settlers who saw her efforts as threatening rather than valuable. One passage in particular caught Eleanor's attention. They fear what they do not understand. To them, my mixed blood makes me suspect, my education makes me dangerous. But each child who learns to read is a bridge between worlds, and bridges, once built, are difficult to tear down. Eleanor closed the book, a new resolve strengthening her spirit. Tomorrow, she would face Judge Hollister not as a supplicant, but as an educator with a vital role to play in this frontier community. If Nightwind could build bridges against far greater odds, surely Eleanor Morgan could do the same. Morning came too quickly, grey light barely filtering through her window as Eleanor dressed in her most professional attire. She braided her greying hair severely and pinned it in a coronet that lent her additional height, adjusting her spectacles with care. Appearance shouldn't matter, but experience had taught her that first impressions often did, especially with men of the judge's generation. Sam was waiting with the buggy when she emerged from her cabin, a thermos of coffee and a basket, covered with a cloth on the seat. Mrs. Whitaker insisted you needed breakfast, he explained. There's enough for the judge too, if you think it appropriate to offer. The thoughtfulness of this gesture touched Eleanor deeply. Thank you, and thank Mrs. Whitaker for me. The ride to town passed mostly in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the schoolhouse, Eleanor saw Judge Hollister already waiting, punctual to the minute. I can stay if you prefer, Sam offered quietly. Eleanor shook her head. I think it's better if I handle this alone. She smiled faintly. Bridges once built are difficult to tear down. Sam's eyebrows rose slightly at the familiar words, then understanding dawned. My mother's wisdom serves you well. He helped her down from the buggy. I'll return at noon to hear the verdict. Judge Hollister greeted them with formal courtesy, his assessing gaze missing nothing. Eleanor invited him inside, where she had already lit the stove to ward off the morning chill. Coffee, Judge? And Mrs. Whitaker sent breakfast pastries if you'd care for one. The judge accepted both offers with appreciation, and they settled at her desk with steaming cups. Now, Miss Morgan, he began, perhaps you could tell me how you came to be in Pine Ridge? Eleanor provided a straightforward account of her correspondence with William Parker, her journey west, and the subsequent rejection. She neither minimized nor dramatized the humiliation of that first day, simply presented the facts as they had occurred. And Mr. Thornton's intervention, the judge prompted. Mr. Thornton offered shelter when I had nowhere else to go, Eleanor explained. It was an act of kindness, not impropriety. His housekeeper, Mrs. Whitaker, serves as chaperone, and I stay in a separate cabin on the property. The judge nodded thoughtfully, making a note in a small book. And the teaching position? How did that arise? Mr. Thornton mentioned that Pine Ridge had been seeking a teacher. Given my experience and qualifications, it seemed a natural fit. The town council interviewed me thoroughly and voted to offer me the position. Yes, I've spoken with Mayor Jenkins about that vote, Judge Hollister confirmed. He was quite emphatic about the council's authority in the matter. The judge sipped his coffee. Now, regarding your qualifications? Eleanor presented her credentials, explaining her training and experience at Fairchild Academy. The judge examined each document carefully, asking pertinent questions about her teaching methods, disciplinary approach, and curriculum planning. Impressive, he acknowledged. Fairchild has an excellent reputation. He set aside the papers and regarded her directly. Mr. Parker's concerns, however, relate not to your academic qualifications, but to your physical condition. He suggests it may undermine your authority with students. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Judge Hollister, I taught for 8 years in Philadelphia with this same condition. Students respect knowledge, fairness, and genuine interest in their progress far more than physical appearance. Yes, children are naturally curious about differences. My first class yesterday had questions about my limp, which I answered directly. Once satisfied, they focused on their lessons, not my limitations. The judge's expression remained neutral, though Eleanor thought she detected a glimmer of approval. May I see your lesson plans and student assessments from yesterday? For the next hour, they reviewed Eleanor's detailed notes on each student's abilities and her planned curriculum. The judge occasionally made notes, but offered no indication of his thoughts. Finally, he closed his notebook and rose. One last question, Miss Morgan. Why teaching? A woman of your intelligence and education might have pursued less challenging paths. The unexpected query caught Eleanor off guard, but she answered honestly. Because education transforms lives, Judge Hollister. My own physical limitations closed many doors, but knowledge opened others. Each child who learns to read, to calculate, to question and think critically gains freedom that can never be taken away. She smiled slightly. As someone recently reminded me, bridges once built are difficult to tear down. Something shifted in the judge's expression. A softening, perhaps even respect. Well put, Miss Morgan. He gathered his hat and gloves. I believe I've seen enough. Eleanor's heart sank at his abrupt conclusion. And your decision? I will announce it at noon, the judge replied. I understand several council members and parents will be gathering here then. The next few hours passed in agonizing slowness for Eleanor. She taught her morning classes with as much focus as she could muster, but anxiety hummed beneath every lesson. By 11:30, parents began arriving, ostensibly to observe the class, but clearly awaiting the judge's verdict. William Parker appeared with Harriet Finch, their expressions suggesting confidence in the outcome they desired. At precisely noon, Judge Hollister returned, accompanied by Mayor Jenkins and the other council members. Sam slipped in quietly, positioning himself near the back wall, his presence a silent support that Eleanor appreciated more than he could know. The judge called for attention, the room falling instantly silent as students and adults alike turned expectantly toward him. After thorough review of Miss Morgan's qualifications, teaching methods, and classroom management, I have reached a decision regarding her suitability as Pine Ridge's schoolteacher. His gaze swept the room. It is my finding that Miss Eleanor Morgan is not merely qualified, but exceptionally well suited to this position. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. William Parker's face darkened with displeasure, while Sam's expression remained carefully neutral, though his eyes held a glint of satisfaction. Miss Morgan's academic credentials are impeccable, Judge Hollister continued. Her teaching experience is substantial, and her approach to education is both rigorous and adaptable to frontier needs. As for concerns regarding her physical condition, here, he paused meaningfully, I find them entirely without merit. In my observation, Miss Morgan manages her classroom with confidence and authority that has nothing to do with physical attributes and everything to do with character and intelligence. He turned to face William Parker directly. "Mr. Parker, while I appreciate your concern for educational standards, I find no basis for your objections. The town council acted within its authority in appointing Miss Morgan, and I see no reason to overturn their decision." Relief flooded through Eleanor so intensely she had to grip her desk for support. Around her, several parents broke into spontaneous applause, joined by the older students who understood the significance of the moment. Mayor Jenkins stepped forward, offering his hand to Eleanor. "Congratulations, Miss Morgan. Pine Ridge is fortunate to have you." As the crowd dispersed, students returning to their desks and parents departing with varying degrees of satisfaction, William Parker approached Eleanor, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. "This isn't over," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Pine Ridge has traditions and standards that existed long before you arrived. Some of us intend to preserve them." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. Parker, I can only imagine how disappointing this must be for you. First, I failed to be the bride you envisioned, and now I've failed to be driven away by your disapproval. Perhaps it's time to consider that your traditions and standards might benefit from some reconsideration." His face flushed dark with fury, but before he could respond, Sam appeared at Eleanor's side, his presence a physical barrier between her and Parker's anger. "The judge has ruled, Parker," Sam said evenly. "Time to accept it with grace." With a final glare, Parker turned and left, Harriet Finch hurrying after him like a shadow. Sam turned to Eleanor, rare emotion breaking through his usual reserve. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected softly. "I wouldn't be here without your help." His gaze held hers for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he smiled, a full, genuine expression that transformed his serious features. Night Wind would be proud. The afternoon classes proceeded with renewed energy, the children sensing that something significant had transpired. Eleanor taught with a lightness she hadn't felt in years, secure in her position and purpose. By the end of the school day, exhaustion mingled with elation as she dismissed her students. Hannah lingered, helping Eleanor straighten the classroom, as had already become their custom. "Pa says we should celebrate," she announced. "Mrs. Whitaker is making a special dinner, and I can stay up late, and Tom is bringing his fiddle for music after." "That sounds wonderful," Eleanor said, touched by the thoughtfulness. "But your father shouldn't go to such trouble." Hannah grinned mischievously. "Pa says it's no trouble at all when something's worth celebrating. And he says you being our teacher is definitely worth celebrating." That evening, Evergreen Ranch was transformed. Lanterns hung from the porch and surrounding trees, casting warm light across the yard. A table had been set outside, covered with Mrs. Whitaker's finest cooking. Roast venison, fresh bread, apple pie, and more delicacies than Eleanor could name. Several ranch hands and their families had been invited, creating a festive atmosphere. Sam approached as Eleanor took in the scene, offering a glass of cider. "Too much?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "It's perfect," she assured him. "I haven't had a celebration in my honor since, well, I can't remember when." The evening unfolded in warm conversation, hearty food, and eventually music, as Tom produced his promised fiddle. Another hand had a harmonica, and Mrs. Whitaker surprised everyone by revealing a beautiful singing voice. Under the starlit sky, with mountains silhouetted against the horizon, Eleanor felt something she had almost forgotten, pure, uncomplicated joy. Later, as the celebration wound down and Hannah had finally succumbed to sleep, despite her determination to stay awake, Eleanor found herself sitting beside Sam on the porch steps, a comfortable silence between them. "Thank you," she said finally, "not just for tonight, but for everything since I arrived. You've shown me kindness when you had no obligation to do so." Sam gazed out at the darkened landscape. "My mother used to say that kindness is never an obligation, just a choice that makes the world less harsh." He turned to her, expression serious in the lantern light. "You've brought something important to Pine Ridge, Ellie. Not just education, but a challenge to the way things have always been. That's no small thing." Eleanor considered his words. Change is rarely comfortable. William Parker won't give up. Easily. "No," Sam agreed, "but neither will you, I think." She smiled at his perception. "Neither will I." In that moment, with stars scattered across the Montana sky and the warmth of celebration still surrounding them, Eleanor felt the first tentative roots of belonging taking hold. This place, so different from everything she had known, was becoming home in ways Philadelphia never had. Not because it was perfect or because everyone accepted her, but because here, for the first time, she was fighting for her place rather than simply accepting the limitations others imposed. As if reading her thoughts, Sam spoke quietly. "You belong here, you know, not because anyone granted permission, but because you've earned it." The simple statement, delivered without sentimentality but with absolute conviction, settled into Eleanor's heart like a missing piece finally found. "Yes," she agreed, "I believe I do." The morning of the hearing dawned clear and bitterly cold, the January sun casting long blue shadows across the snow-covered landscape without offering any real warmth. Eleanor stood before the small mirror in her cabin, fastening the buttons of her best dress, a deep navy wool that lent her a dignified professional appearance. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the anxiety she worked so hard to conceal. Today would determine not just her future as Pine Ridge's teacher, but also her place in the community she had come to cherish. William Parker's formal complaint had escalated from petty interference to a genuine threat, one that could force her to abandon the life and purpose she had found here. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Whittaker entered without waiting for a response, carrying a tray with tea and toast. "You'll need something in your stomach," the older woman insisted, her tone brooking no argument. "Can't face down that peacock Parker on an empty belly." Eleanor smiled despite her nerves. Mrs. Whittaker's straightforward practicality had been a constant comfort these past months. "Thank you, though I'm not sure I can eat." Mrs. Whittaker set the tray down firmly. "Course you can. Ain't nothing special about William Parker except the size of his pride. You've faced worse than him and come through standing." As Eleanor obediently sipped the tea, Mrs. Whittaker busied herself adding another log to the cabin's small stove. "Samuel's almost ready with the buggy. Wants to get to town early so you don't feel rushed." She paused, her normally brisk manner softening. "He's worried for you, though he won't say as much." "I know," Eleanor replied quietly. Sam's concern had been evident in a dozen small ways, ensuring the buggy had extra blankets against the cold, personally checking the runners for the icy roads, staying up late, helping her organize her defense for the hearing. His silent support meant more than elaborate reassurances would have. "That man," Mrs. Whittaker continued, a knowing look in her eyes, "hasn't taken such interest in anyone since his Clara passed. Not that he'd ever admit it outright." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the stoves. Warmth. "He's been kind to a newcomer in difficult circumstances. Nothing more." Mrs. Whittaker's expression suggested she found this assessment amusingly naive, but chose not to argue. "If you say so, dear. Now finish that toast. Samuel Thornton may be too proper to say it, but I'm not. We need you here, and not just for teaching." Before Eleanor could respond to this startling declaration, the sound of the buggy approaching signaled it was time to depart. She gathered her materials, teaching plans, student progress reports, letters of support from parents, and examples of children's work that demonstrated the effectiveness of her methods. Whatever happened today, she would defend her approach to education with every resource at her disposal. Sam waited beside the buggy, his tall figure wrapped in a heavy coat, breath visible in the frigid air. His expression, normally so controlled, revealed tension around his eyes. "Ready?" he asked simply. Eleanor nodded, allowing him to help her into the buggy. As they set off toward town, Hannah waved from the porch, her small face solemn with understanding beyond her years. Eleanor waved back, a silent promise to the child who had become so dear to her. The journey passed mostly in silence, each lost in private thoughts as the buggy glided over snow-packed roads. Pine Ridge emerged from the winter landscape like an illustration from a storybook. Smoke rising from chimneys, buildings outlined in white, the church steeple reaching toward a perfectly blue sky. "Whatever happens today," Sam said suddenly, breaking the silence, "remember you're not alone in this." Eleanor turned to him, warmed by more than the buffalo robe tucked around them. "I know. Your support has meant everything." "Not just mine," Sam clarified, his amber eyes serious. "You've made more allies in Pine Ridge than Parker realizes. People respect what you've accomplished with their children." As if confirming his words, several townspeople nodded or called greetings as their buggy passed through the main street. Even Blacksmith Johnson, never one for social niceties, touched his hat in a gesture of respect when they passed his shop. The town hall, which served as the venue for all official proceedings, was already filling with people when they arrived. Eleanor had expected a small procedural hearing with just Judge Hollister and the town council. Instead, it appeared that half of Pine Ridge had turned out for the occasion, their presence transforming a simple administrative review into a community event. Mayor Jenkins approached as Sam helped Eleanor from the buggy. "Quite a turnout," he observed, his expression suggesting he found the situation both amusing and awkward. "Seems folks have strong opinions about education these days." Inside, the hall had been arranged with a table at the front for Judge Hollister and the council members. Chairs filled the remaining space, many already occupied by parents, merchants, and other residents of Pine Ridge. William Parker sat in the front row, his expression suggesting he anticipated triumph. Beside him, Harriet Finch whispered behind, her gloved hand to several other well-dressed women, their disapproving glances making their alliance clear. Judge Hollister entered from a side door, his dignified presence immediately commanding attention. The room fell silent as he took his seat at the center of the table, flanked by Mayor Jenkins and the other council members. "This hearing," the judge began, his voice carrying easily through the room, "concerns a formal complaint regarding the teaching methods and curriculum choices of Miss Eleanor Morgan, Pine Ridge's schoolteacher. Mr. William Parker has raised specific objections, which we will examine in detail." He paused, surveying the crowded room. "Given the significant community interest, I will allow relevant testimony from citizens following the formal presentations." William Parker rose, straightening his already immaculate suit. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the opportunity to address my concerns about the inappropriate and potentially harmful educational approach Miss Morgan has implemented in our schoolhouse." For the next 30 minutes, Parker presented his case with the polished delivery of a man accustomed to public speaking. He cited specific examples of what he termed questionable content. Eleanor's inclusion of Native American stories alongside traditional lessons, her emphasis on practical applications rather than rote memorization, her encouragement of girls to pursue subjects traditionally reserved for boys. Furthermore, Parker continued, his voice taking on a righteous tone. Miss Morgan's physical limitations raise legitimate concerns about her ability to maintain proper discipline and authority. Several incidents of misbehavior have been reported, suggesting the students do not accord her appropriate respect. Eleanor maintained a composed expression throughout these accusations, though internally she fought rising indignation. Parker's complaints revealed not just personal animus toward her, but a fundamental misunderstanding of modern educational philosophy. His vision of schooling remained rooted in rigid hierarchies and narrow definitions of knowledge. Precisely the approach she had worked to move beyond. When Parker finally concluded, Judge Hollister turned to Eleanor. "Miss Morgan, you may now respond to these allegations." Eleanor rose slowly, gathering her thoughts. The room fell completely silent. Every eye fixed upon the plain woman with graying hair and spectacles who had become the center of community controversy. "Thank you, Your Honor," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I appreciate this opportunity to explain my educational approach and respond to Mr. Parker's concerns." She paused, looking directly at the assembled townspeople, rather than just the judge. "When I arrived in Pine Ridge 4 months ago, I found children with widely varying levels of education. Some could barely write their names. Others had advanced academic skills, but little practical knowledge. My challenge was to create a curriculum that would serve all of them effectively." Eleanor described her approach, building foundational skills while incorporating practical applications relevant to frontier life. She explained how stories from different cultural traditions taught not just reading comprehension, but also critical thinking and respect for diverse perspectives. As for the allegations regarding discipline, she continued, "I maintain order through engagement rather than intimidation. When children find learning meaningful and relevant, behavioral problems naturally decrease. The progress reports I've provided demonstrate significant improvement in both academic achievement and classroom conduct." She turned slightly, addressing Parker directly. "Regarding my physical limitations, yes, I walk with a limp. I wear spectacles. My hair grayed prematurely. These external characteristics have absolutely no bearing on my ability to teach, to inspire, or to maintain appropriate standards in my classroom." Eleanor returned her attention to Judge Hollister, her voice growing more passionate. "Education is not merely the transmission of facts, Your Honor. It is the cultivation of minds capable of thinking, questioning, and adapting to a changing world. The children of Pine Ridge deserve nothing less, regardless of their gender, background, or future aspirations." As she resumed her seat, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Judge Hollister nodded thoughtfully, then addressed the assembly. "I will now hear from community members with relevant perspectives to offer." What followed surprised even Eleanor, who had dared to hope for some support. One by one, parents rose to speak on her behalf. Farmer Wilson described how his son, previously resistant to books, now read voluntarily every evening. Mrs. Peterson explained how her daughter had developed newfound confidence in mathematics under Eleanor's guidance. Even gruff blacksmith Johnson stood to acknowledge that his children's education had improved markedly since Miss Morgan's arrival. Most surprising was the testimony of Martha Jenkins, the mayor's wife, who rarely participated in public proceedings. "Before Miss Morgan arrived," she stated firmly, "the girls of Pine Ridge were taught little beyond basic literacy and figures. Miss Morgan has opened doors for them, showing them that their minds are as capable as any boys. My daughter now speaks of becoming a naturalist, perhaps even attending university someday. This is progress, not something to be feared." Throughout these testimonials, Eleanor sat very still, overwhelmed by the public affirmation of her work. Sam, seated beside her, placed his hand briefly over hers, a gesture of reassurance visible only to them. Finally, after nearly a dozen speakers, William Parker requested permission to respond. His face had grown increasingly flushed as the testimonials mounted against his position, his confident demeanor giving way to visible agitation. "With all due respect," he began, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Sentiment should not override principle. Traditional educational methods have served generations adequately. Miss Morgan's unconventional approach, while perhaps yielding some short-term enthusiasm, undermines established values and authority structures essential to proper development." His gaze swept dismissively over Eleanor. "Furthermore, we must consider the example set for impressionable young minds. A teacher embodies the standards to which students should aspire. Miss Morgan's condition presents an inappropriate model of womanhood for the girls of Pine Ridge." A shocked silence followed this statement, its naked prejudice too blatant to ignore. Even some of Parker's allies shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to publicly endorse such open discrimination. Before Judge Hollister could respond, Sam Thornton rose to his feet. Eleanor looked up in surprise. Sam had promised his support, but had not mentioned any intention to speak. "Your Honor," Sam began, his deep voice carrying easily through the now silent hall, "I request permission to address Mr. Parker's final point." Judge Hollister nodded, curiosity evident in his expression. "Proceed, Mr. Thornton." Sam turned to face the assembly rather than addressing the judge directly. His normally reserved expression had given way to something Eleanor had rarely witnessed: raw, powerful emotion, carefully controlled but unmistakably present. "William Parker speaks of appropriate models of womanhood," Sam began, his voice measured, "but I wonder by what authority he appoints himself judge of such matters." He moved to stand beside Eleanor, a physical demonstration of solidarity that caused whispers throughout the room. "I have observed Miss Morgan's teaching firsthand, both in the schoolhouse and in private lessons with my daughter. What I've witnessed is not merely competent instruction, but genuine inspiration, the kind that changes lives and opens minds." Sam's gaze found Parker's, unwavering in its intensity. "As for her so-called condition, the physical characteristics that Mr. Parker finds so objectionable, I see something very different. I see a woman who faced significant challenges with dignity and perseverance. I see intelligence, compassion, and quiet courage demonstrated daily. If these qualities constitute an inappropriate model for the children of Pine Ridge, then perhaps our understanding of worth requires serious reconsideration." He paused, seeming to gather himself for his final statement. Miss Morgan arrived in Pine Ridge, expecting to be judged by her character and abilities rather than her appearance. Some of us failed that test initially. Today offers an opportunity to demonstrate that Pine Ridge values substance over superficial judgment. I, for one, believe Eleanor Morgan represents the finest qualities we could hope to instill in our children, regardless of gender. With that, Sam returned to his seat beside Eleanor, who sat stunned by the power and personal nature of his defense. Never in their months of acquaintance had he spoken so openly about his regard for her. Certainly never in such a public forum. Judge Hollister cleared his throat, reclaiming authority over the proceedings. "Having heard all testimony, I will take a brief recess to consider my ruling. This court will reconvene in 30 minutes. As people rose, stretching and forming small discussion groups, Eleanor turned to Sam. "Thank you," she said simply, words inadequate for the emotions his defense had stirred. "I didn't expect every word was true," Sam interrupted quietly. "Perhaps I should have said them sooner and not just in a courtroom." Before Eleanor could respond to this remarkable statement, Hannah appeared, having slipped away from Mrs. Whitaker to join them. "Did I miss it?" she asked anxiously. "Did the judge say you can keep teaching us?" "Not yet, sweetheart," Sam explained, lifting her onto the bench between them. Judge Hollister is thinking about his decision now. Hannah's small face grew serious. I told all my friends that you're the best teacher ever, Miss Ellie. Even the boys who pretend not to like school think so. That means more to me than you know, Eleanor replied, genuinely touched by the child's loyalty. The 30-minute recess extended to nearly an hour as Judge Hollister remained sequestered with the town council. When they finally returned, the judge's expression gave no indication of his decision. The room fell silent immediately, tension palpable as everyone waited for the ruling that would affect not just Eleanor's future, but the educational direction of Pine Ridge itself. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, Judge Hollister began, his sonorous voice filling the hall. I have reached a decision regarding Mr. Parker's complaint against Miss Eleanor Morgan. He adjusted his spectacles, reviewing notes before continuing. The specific allegations regarding curriculum content and teaching methods have been thoroughly addressed by Miss Morgan's detailed documentation and supporting testimony from parents. I find these complaints without merit. The educational approach implemented by Miss Morgan demonstrates sound pedagogy adapted appropriately to local circumstances. A ripple of approval moved through many in the audience, quickly silenced by the judge's raised hand. Regarding concerns about discipline and classroom management, the evidence suggests improved rather than diminished student conduct under Miss Morgan's guidance. Multiple witnesses have attested to positive behavioral changes in previously disruptive students. Judge Hollister paused, his expression growing more severe. As for the matter of Miss Morgan's physical characteristics being deemed inappropriate for her position, here, he fixed William Parker with a stern gaze. I find such objections not merely baseless, but contrary to the principles of fairness and merit that should govern employment in any civilized community. Relief washed through Eleanor so intensely, she felt momentarily lightheaded. Sam's hand found hers beneath the table, a steadying presence as Judge Hollister continued. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that Miss Eleanor Morgan shall continue in her position as schoolteacher of Pine Ridge, with full authority to implement her curriculum and teaching methods as she deems appropriate, subject only to regular review by the town council through established procedures. Applause erupted from many in the assembly, quickly tempered by the judge's stern expression. However, he added when quiet had been restored, this case has revealed a deeper issue within Pine Ridge that merits attention. The division of opinion regarding educational philosophy suggests the need for broader community discussion about the future direction of your school. Mayor Jenkins nodded agreement. A wise observation, Your Honor. Perhaps a town meeting dedicated to educational matters would be beneficial. Indeed, Judge Hollister concurred. I recommend such a forum be organized within the next month. In the meantime, Miss Morgan continues her duties with the full backing of this court. He struck his gavel once, definitively. This hearing is concluded. The aftermath was a blur of congratulations and well-wishes as supporters surrounded Eleanor. Parents expressed relief, children cheered, those who had been allowed to attend, and even some who had remained neutral offered cautious approval of the outcome. William Parker departed immediately, his expression thunderous. Harriet Finch, and a few allies trailing in his wake like storm clouds dispersing. Through it all, Sam remained close at Eleanor's side, a quiet but unmistakable declaration of allegiance visible to all of Pine Ridge. By the time they finally extricated themselves and climbed into the buggy for the journey home, Eleanor felt both exhilarated and exhausted by the emotional intensity of the day. You did it, Sam said simply as they left town behind, the buggy runners gliding smoothly over packed snow. We did it, Eleanor corrected, the plurality significant. Your testimony was unexpected. Sam's hands tightened slightly on the reins. I meant every word, Ellie. They rode in silence for several minutes, the white landscape passing in pristine beauty around them. Finally, Sam spoke again, his voice holding an unfamiliar hesitancy. "There's something I need to show you when we get back to the ranch. Something I've been working on." Eleanor looked at him curiously. "What kind of something?" "A possibility," he replied cryptically. "If you're interested." Upon returning to Evergreen Ranch, they found Mrs. Whitaker and Hannah waiting anxiously on the porch. Hannah flung herself into Eleanor's arms the moment she descended from the buggy. "The judge said yes!" the child exclaimed, clearly having already received the news through Pine Ridge's efficient gossip network. "You get to keep teaching us forever." Eleanor laughed, hugging Hannah tightly. "Well, I'm not sure about forever, but certainly for the foreseeable future." After a celebratory meal, Mrs. Whitaker had prepared all of Eleanor's favorites in the anticipation of good news. Sam suggested they bundle up for a short walk. "There's still daylight left, and I'd like to show you that project I mentioned." Curious, Eleanor wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and followed Sam from the house. To her surprise, he led her not toward the barn or outbuildings, but along a path through the orchard toward a small rise that overlooked the entire property. "Where are we going?" she asked, her breath visible in the cold afternoon air. "Just over this hill," Sam replied, offering his arm to steady her as they navigated the snow-covered incline. As they crested the rise, Eleanor stopped abruptly, surprised by what awaited them. On a flat area overlooking the valley stood the beginnings of a new structure, foundation laid, framework partially erected, builders' materials neatly organized nearby. "What is this?" she asked, though something in her heart already suspected the answer. Sam surveyed the construction site with quiet pride. "The school I mentioned before Christmas. A place where you could teach according to your own philosophy, without interference from Parker or anyone else." Eleanor moved closer, examining the partially built structure with growing wonder. The foundation was generous, much larger than the current schoolhouse in town. Windows had been planned on all sides to maximize natural light. A stone chimney rose from what would clearly be a substantial fireplace. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "But how? When did you start this?" "After our conversation on New Year's Eve," Sam admitted. "I wanted to have something concrete to show you, not just an idea. The men have been working whenever weather permits." Eleanor turned to him, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what this represented. Not just a building, but faith in her abilities and commitment to her vision for education. "Sam, this is... I don't know what to say." "You don't need to decide anything today," he assured her. "The hearing went in your favor, so there's no immediate pressure to leave the town school. But this option exists whenever you're ready." He paused, seeming to gather courage for his next words. "And there's something else I'd like you to consider as well." Eleanor looked at him questioningly, the intensity of his expression sending her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "Since Clara died," Sam began carefully, "Hannah and I have managed, but something important has been missing from our lives. Something I didn't fully recognize until you arrived at Pine Ridge Station that day." He took her gloved hands in, his amber eyes holding hers with unprecedented vulnerability. "You came to Montana territory seeking acceptance and partnership with a man who couldn't see your true value. I'm asking if you might consider building a different kind of partnership, one based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and..." He hesitated briefly. "Genuine love." Eleanor's breath caught, the world seeming to still around them as his words registered fully. "Sam, are you asking you to marry me?" "Yes." He smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed his serious features, though perhaps with less eloquence than you deserve. Joy bubbled up within Eleanor, so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. This man, who had seen beyond her limp and spectacles and grey hair from the very beginning, who had defended her publicly and supported her privately, whose quiet strength and integrity had become the foundation of her new life, was offering her not just professional opportunity but personal partnership. "I never expected this," she admitted, voice thick with emotion. "When William Parker rejected me, I thought that chance was gone forever." "Parker's rejection was the luckiest moment of my life," Sam replied softly. "It brought you to Evergreen, ranch, to Hannah, to me." Eleanor looked from Sam to the partially constructed school building, symbols of a future she could never have imagined that first difficult day in Pine Ridge. "Yes," she said finally, certainty filling her completely. "Yes to the school, yes to becoming Hannah's mother, yes to partnering with you in every way." Sam's hands tightened around hers, his expression one of profound relief and happiness. "Are you sure? Life here isn't always easy. Winters are harsh, the work never ends, and there will always be people like Parker who see differences as deficiencies." "I'm sure," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "I've spent my life being defined by what others perceived as limitations. Here, with you and Hannah, I've found purpose and acceptance I never thought possible." She smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "Besides, what is marriage but a commitment to face life's challenges together rather than alone?" Sam drew her closer, his arms encircling her with gentle strength. "Eleanor Morgan, you are the most beautiful woman I have ever known, not despite your differences, but because of the strength, intelligence, and compassion they've helped create in you." As the winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered valley, Eleanor stood within the circle of Sam's embrace, looking out over what would soon be their shared future. The ranch spread below them, the school rising beside them, and beyond, mountains stretching toward a limitless horizon. She had traveled west seeking a new beginning, only to be rejected for her plainness. Yet in that painful moment, true beauty had been revealed. Not in perfect features or fashionable appearance, but in seeing and being seen for one's genuine worth. The snowfall began softly around them, delicate flakes drifting from a pearl-grey sky. Neither moved to seek shelter, unwilling to break this perfect moment of connection. Tomorrow would bring announcements to make, plans to finalize, a future to build together. But for now, this was enough. Two people who had found in each other not just acceptance, but celebration of their truest selves. "We should go back," Sam said eventually, though he made no move to release her. "Hannah will be wondering where we've disappeared to." Eleanor nodded, reluctantly stepping back from his embrace. "Yes, and I believe we have some news to share with her." As they walked hand in hand down the hill toward the warm lights of home, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The mail-order bride rejected for being too plain had found herself valued beyond measure. The teacher judged for her physical limitations had become a respected educator shaping young minds. The lonely woman seeking basic acceptance had discovered profound love. Sometimes, Eleanor realized, rejection merely cleared the path to where one truly belonged. And sometimes true beauty was revealed only to those with vision, to see beyond appearances, to the heart that beat beneath, to the spirit that endured, to the love that transformed everything. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right? On your screen, if this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.